How many documents are in the Genizah, approximately?
So in the Cambridge collection that we have 197,000 from what's known as the Taylor Schechter Cairo Genizah collection, which is this collection brought back in 1897 by Solomon Schechter.
Okay.
Other people went to the same chamber. Before Schechter went, some people went and took away large pieces. The community associated with that synagogue in Egypt were also taking stuff out and selling it. And that found its way to different libraries and museums.
You mean like in the late 1800s they're taking out and selling it? Okay.
And that's one of the reasons why Solomon Schechter went there. He found out about the Genizah because Cambridge was being offered manuscripts for sale from Jerusalem by a dealer in Jerusalem called Solomon Wertheimer. And he was offering various medieval fragments of medieval manuscripts. Sort of the pages of Bibles, bits of Mishnah, ketubot, marriage deeds, that kind of thing. And Schechter wasn't that interested in it. But then he met the story is long involved, but he met two Scottish women who had travelled to the Middle East to go to St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai. They were great adventurers and explorers, and they went to old monasteries around the Mediterranean to recover texts of the Bible. They were Christians, very, very devout Christian Presbyterians. And their intention...
This is Lewis and Gibson.
Lewis and Gibson, exactly.
Okay.
Two immensely rich widows from Scotland, Irvine in Scotland, raised Presbyterian, but they lived in Cambridge by just this bizarre combination of coincidences. All of the sort of stars aligned, and this is the whole Genizah story. They lived in Cambridge because one of them had married a Cambridge academic. Both of their husbands, they married late in life in their 40s or something, and both their husbands were kind of weak Victorian men who died of Victorian illnesses, running for trains.
What do you mean running for trains?
He ran for a train and died on the train after sitting down.
Wow.
It was too much strain on his Victorian heart.
Gosh. Okay.
Yeah, and the other one died in bed after asking for flannel underwear.
What?
Yeah.
He died after... Wait, what?
Yeah.
I'm confused, because he was cold? Or?
I don't know, but his last words were apparently, please buy me some flannel underwear.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Maybe he was going into shock and he was really cold or something. All right.
So anyway, these two Scottish women who had married, one was a preacher and the other was a librarian, their husbands, and so they were associated with the university, but being women in Cambridge in the 1890s, you couldn't be employed by the university. They were very scholarly. They knew all sorts of languages from Greek to Arabic, and they travelled. And they were doing what was in vogue at the time, which was to go to monasteries and find old manuscripts with a view of improving our knowledge of the original text of the Bible. Right.
That's how Codex Sinaiticus was found.
Exactly. They were following in the footsteps of people like Tischendorf.
Okay.
Who had really kind of revolutionised the approach. That you have printed editions that we've been relying on for centuries, but how reliable are these? We should go and find the best, earliest reliable texts. The critical editions of the Bible is what we want to create. And so they were doing that off their own back because they were immensely rich through some accident of fate. They had inherited a lot of money from a Canadian who had built railroads. Okay. Who had, like a Scot, had gone out and, founded railroads in Canada.
It's like a theme in their lives, railroads, right? They're killing husbands, giving them wealth.
Yeah, right. And after their husbands died, they decided to travel to get over the grief because they'd always been great travellers. And they went to St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai, and they discovered what was then the earliest Aramaic copy of the New Testament.
Okay. Is that the, what is that called? That's the old Syriac, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, I'm a little, it's not my area. So, and how they got that, because, obviously Tischendorf had been to St. Catherine's before, and he had left behind... Well, they don't like him in St. Catherine's because he took Codex Sinaiticus away and they never got it back. The two women, when they went, had a very different experience because, one, they were kind of unthreatening because they were women. Two, they spoke Greek, which Tischendorf had very bad Greek.
Okay.
They spoke Greek. They were able to communicate with the monk librarian in Greek.
Oh, wow.
Which was, because scholars in those days didn't speak the languages. They knew the ancient language, right? Yeah, not the sort of modern, vulgar dialect that they speak, right? But they could speak Greek. And that's how they'd managed to inveigle their way into all sorts of monasteries around the Mediterranean and made friends with the librarians. Yeah. And in this case, the librarian, I think Galaction, his name was, he opened up like the special, this is where we keep the good stuff, that he hadn't shown Tischendorf. And in it, they found this Aramaic copy. Now, importantly as well, the other thing they did is they photographed items in situ. They didn't take them away. They were pioneers of kind of academic photography of manuscripts,
Wow.
something that you
Dabble in, yeah. Okay.
And so they came back with a whole Cambridge expedition to photograph the manuscripts
Oh, wow. At St. Catherine's in
at St.
Sinai.
Catherine's
Okay.
on the spot.
So their goal wasn't even the Cairo, Genizah, or Cairo. It
No.
was St. Catherine's Monastery
Yes.
in Sinai.
And the Genizah was just a byproduct, because whenever they passed through Suez or Cairo or any of those places, and they took a tour to Palestine, they used to go to like the book dealers in the market and look what they had, and they bought things. And in that way, they bought some manuscripts that had been only just stolen from St. Catherine's, and they were able to return them to the monastery.
Okay.
But also, they bought a whole bunch of Hebrew stuff.
Yeah.
Now, they could read Hebrew. They brought it back to Cambridge, like, scattered individual leaves of Bibles and that kind of stuff. And they brought it back to Cambridge in 1896, and they were in their house. They built a massive baronial mansion in the middle of Cambridge because they were so rich.
Yeah.
And they were in their baronial mansion looking at these, and they realized they couldn't understand what all of the pieces were. They could recognize some things, like Bibles and so on, because they knew the Bible. They could read biblical Hebrew, but they couldn't recognize other works. So they called in Solomon Schechter. Now, Schechter was then teaching rabbinics in Cambridge University. He was a Jew teaching in an Anglican organization, rabbinics, to people intended mainly, Cambridge, up until then, Cambridge had been a factory for producing Anglican priests. It was modernizing a bit, but essentially, the university was still kind of like an echo of the monasteries, That's his job was.
So Solomon Schechter was a professor here at Cambridge,
Yes.
but he was teaching clergymen or Christian clergymen?
Well, essentially, yes. He was people who were learning Hebrew were essentially learning it to enter.
Okay, and I'll just make a little note here for American Jews. Every American Jew I've ever spoken to about Solomon Schechter, they're like, "Oh, I know the school," right? Because there's a chain of schools in the United States called Solomon Schechter.
Yeah. He is.
Okay.
I mean, he's so immensely famous in American Jewish circles and utterly unknown in English Jewish circles. And yet his career began here. He was essentially placed in Cambridge University to improve Jewish learning in England, right? So the Montefiore family in England had originally tried to bring over Jewish scholars, the finest Jewish scholars of Europe, to England to improve the intellectual standing of the Jews of England, right? They thought they needed one or two kind of tentpole scholars, like to bring up the whole. Solomon Schechter, was the sort of pointy tip of Cambridge's long interest in Jewish studies and in Hebrew in particular. But Cambridge did have a very long interest in Hebrew. We've had the professor of Hebrew since the 16th century. We've been collecting Hebrew manuscripts since the 16th century. And every college library has a collection of Hebrew books, some of them very old, from the early days of printing, showing that the people who worked in Cambridge were engaging with Jewish scholarship, engaging with Jewish texts, engaging with Jewish ideas throughout. And much of this was the Reformation, the interest in Judaism and the Hebrew Bible at that stage, but all through up to the present day. And so Schechter and Schiller Zanesi, his predecessors, were new because it wasn't just Jewish books. These were actually Jews in the university who were teaching, which was very unusual.
And there were Jews who hadn't converted to Christianity, who were still within the Jewish
milieu. So both of them were still very much in the Jewish milieu. Especially, both of them, but especially Schechter, who went on to America to to save conservative Judaism in America.